Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our regular council meeting of November 14th, 2022. First item, I'll call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First order of business is agenda item 1.1, Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, region number 3. Agenda item 1.2, conflict of interest declaration, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? Thank you. Moving on to acceptance of the agenda item 2.1. We have that before you that was circulated, our regular council meeting agenda for today, November 14, 2022. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get someone to make a motion to adopt the agenda? Deputy Mayor Pickering. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving down to agenda item 3.1, adoption of the previous minutes from our regular council meeting held on October 24th, 2022. Were there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Seeing none, can I get someone to make a motion to adopt the minutes from October 24th? Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And then moving down to agenda item 3.2 for organizational council meeting minutes from October the 24th as well. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, can I get someone to make a motion to adopt those minutes? Councillor Chapman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving down to agenda item 7.1 under bylaws and policies. We have our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills. He's going to be presenting on bylaw 859-P-11-22 land use bylaw text amendment, first reading. Cameron, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Van Rijn. First of all, just a couple of notes before I begin. So the report was initially prepared by our senior planner, Mel Messier. Mel couldn't be here tonight due to a family emergency that she's taking care of. So I'm going to be presenting in her stead. Second of all, I would provide an update to council with respect to Mel. I know that council may or may not be aware of this, but Mel has been provided with an opportunity to take a position with the City of Calgary, which is just a tremendous opportunity for her, and we're very excited for her, while very sad for herself. She's been an absolutely stellar employee, joined us as an intern back in the early part of 2020, just prior to the arrival of COVID, and it's been through some very interesting times with the town of Coaldale, and has been just a phenomenal resource for us and an absolutely stellar employee. So she's going to be greatly missed, but we do have her until the end of the month, and we're gonna get as much out of her while she's here as we can. So very excited for her to be back so that we can carry on, hopefully with training a new employee in short order. So with respect to this particular bylaw, what we're proposing here is it's really two totally separate issues with some text amendments to the land use bylaw. So the land use bylaw is a fairly lengthy document, several hundred pages long, and I always sort of remark that in order for it to be perfectly accurate, it would probably need to be several thousand pages long. So it's something that that's a constantly evolving document. I was trying to refine the rules and regulations as we see the need for it over time, in between large-scale amendments to that bylaw, which happen every decade or so, typically. So what we have here, the first is an issue that has to do with the industry and light industry zonings. Within those zonings, there is no differentiation between accessory buildings and principal buildings with respect to setback requirements. which is typical in every other type of zoning. So for example, in a residential zoning, a shed is allowed substantially closer to a property line than a house would be, for example. Those regulations are not in place in the industry zoning, and administratively, what we do notice occurs is that we do end up with applications for accessory buildings that are required to be 25 feet from the rear parcel, in particular, as being the issue, that require going to the Municipal Planning Commission. My understanding is that this was spoken with the MPC. Now, I wasn't there, so if one of the council members of the MPC wants to speak to it and provide MPC's feedback on the issue, that might be helpful. My understanding is that MPC's preference would be to continue to leave the regulations in place as they are now. That's
correct. And Councillor Avery, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. We did speak about this at quite length at the MPC meeting, and we thought that because the description of secondary building, you can put your primary building, we just felt the lot coverage and getting closer to that lot line was going to be impactful for the industrial area.
Yeah.
So we thought that leaving it at the 25 feet on the back rear setback and the 10 feet on the sides, then we don't have to worry so much about the fuel loads and all of that in the industrial.
Absolutely. So with respect to this issue, because we're really breaking it out into two, the reason this comes forward is this is one of the things we are often trying to do when we look at the land use bylaw is think about opportunities for red tape reduction, but also balancing that with ensuring that we're meeting important needs with respect to things like safety and fuel loads and things like that. This is one issue amongst many where there's an opportunity to take a look at the bylaw to provide, to reconsider the rules and see if there are opportunities to provide a more streamlined experience for developers while also ensuring that we meet our own needs. So if council isn't interested in addressing this today, we had an opportunity to table this issue for a more comprehensive review of the land use bylaw in that regard. So that's something to consider. The second issue has to do with solar collectors, and this is an interesting one. So when the land use bylaw in its current form was written, larger scale solar collector projects was not really a thing that would have been terribly common. And in reviewing our bylaw, we had sort of a high-level query about the issue and realized that there's really nothing in the bylaw that prevents large-scale, sort of, you might almost say solar farm type coverage in central locations in town, whether it be a commercial district or some other district. Our regulations with respect to solar panels really have to do with solar panels on roofs, on houses, and things like that are very, very low impact. And so what we're suggesting here is the addition of a definition where we provide a definition for residential solar collector as well as non-residential solar collector. And we also indicate that non-residential solar collectors that exceed 300 square feet be required to be considered a discretionary use where their approval would go to the Municipal Planning Commission level. Our approach to this, to be quite clear, is not one where we spent dozens and dozens of hours into research and refining the rules to the point where they're perfect. What we've prepared here is something that we believe will act as a reasonable stopgap in terms of creating some regulation that will give us some control, so that if we had an application tomorrow in this regard, we could deal with it, understanding that we could probably adjust these rules again if that happens. That's something we do in 6 months to a year when we're looking at a larger scale review of the bylaw. But we do believe administratively, the second section, as it deals with solar collectors, administratively, we believe is something that we want to deal with in fairly short order. This would be a bylaw amendment, so this is something where we would go to public hearing and then have potentially second and third reading of that bylaw. And I would suggest that given the relatively sort of non-impactful nature of what we're talking about, given that it doesn't impact anyone directly in the short term, we might be able to turn this around and bring it to a public hearing at the November 28th meeting. And provide for a single advertisement in the Sunnyside News, as well as ensuring that it's on our website and that sort of thing. So that is our recommendation that we set. We did have the public hearing date is December 12th at 5:05, but I do believe we could have that set for the November 28th meeting if council so chooses. and that we can prepare the public hearing for that as well as address second review.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Avery and Deputy Mayor Pickering, based on our discussion at MPC, we're okay to go to first reading on this, and then we can discuss it more at the public hearing portion.
Yep.
So is there any questions for Cameron? Councillor Chapman.
Just two questions, if I may. On the first, with regards to the accessory buildings, if a C-can is added to a facility on a temporary basis, do you have any anything on that?
I mean, they would be treated as an accessory structure, so they would need to meet the setback requirements.
Even for the 90 days that they're required or allowed?
I believe so.
Okay.
We just had one that came to MPC on this past Wednesday, where I think it's a 40-foot container. That's going to be a permanent structure that was approved, and I think the setback was 5 feet.
Okay.
Councilor Avery had a question.
Thank you, Mary. Is it possible to get this bylaw taken into two sections before the public hearing? So one can get approved on second and third reading if the other one does not go through?
Certainly. It would also be, I would suggest, I realize typically with first readings of bylaws, given the timing of this is such that when MPC meetings happen and when council meetings happen, the report for this needed to be prepared prior to the MPC meeting. So if MPC's recommendation is to remove the first portion and council as a whole is in favor of that, I don't think it would be unreasonable to simply strike that now and just address the solar collectors and bylaw moving forward. We're just trying to balance doing the correct process, but also moving with a certain speed.
So based on that comment then, Councillor Avery, do you want to make a motion to remove the first portion of that?
Yes. Yes. So 8.
So before we go that route, is there any more questions for Cameron? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you. Basically on the second part of the presentation there on the solar collectors, 300 square feet is what you're recommending for?
Yeah, yes, we are. That's a number we picked, if you will. So it's not an if you think 300 square feet, you're looking at approximately 20 feet by 15 or so. Anything larger than that would require MPC approval. Our concern is really sort of large scale solar development. 300 feet is a workable number in the short term.
And I appreciate that mainly because I do see, and speaking in favor of your direction on that, Cam, I've noticed that I think there's a couple of places in Coaldale already where they would extend that 300 square feet, right? Would measure it out. But I think the concern would be is the footprint area. So it would be something that you would consider as a standalone solar collector rather than on top of a building, so to say.
Certainly the freestanding is a far bigger concern than with mounted footage.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So on that one, Cam, if you got a big, like say, we'll just use say ITB in consideration for this, if they wanted to do solar panels on top of that building, that's more than 300 square feet. Like, would that fall under that too, or no?
It would simply mean that it would need to be approved at the MPC level.
Okay.
I don't, off the top of my head, see a reason why, a significant reason why that might be
An issue.
an issue. It's the more significant issue is large tracts of undeveloped land in the central portions of town, for example. simply permitted use at the current time.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? So then I'll ask our CAO, how should we approach this and to drop off the first part of this staff report?
I think you can do it one of two ways. You can have a standalone motion that removes the non-solar amendment elements from the bylaw and then pass first reading as amended. It's probably the simplest way to.
Which would simply be 1A.
Okay, so say that one more time then.
I think 1A is the quicker way of
Within the bylaws.
be putting it. Let me just pull that up here.
You just scroll down to the bylaw itself.
Sorry, that's in the attachment.
The attachment.
Yes, please. Sorry, the Schedule A attachment.
Page 17.
The other attachment. So you simply struck point A there. I think that would achieve Councillor Avery's desired result.
Yeah.
So in that case, that would be approved first reading as amended, and the amendment would be the deletion of 1A.
Okay.
Sorry, I
No, that's fine.
didn't find that right away.
So then that I'm looking for someone to sponsor a resolution that council provide first reading of land use bylaw amendment 859-P-11-22 with the deletion of 1A. That captures that then?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And then to set a public hearing date and time as November 28th at 5:05 p.m. Can I get a sponsor for that, please? Councillor Avery, any further discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Moving on to agenda item 8.1 under new business, Southern Regional Stormwater Project update, and we have our Manager of Infrastructure, Dustin Yanke, presenting. Dustin, welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Intent of this report is to give council, for those who are unfamiliar, given that it's a new council term, since this was last discussed, a bit of background on the Southern Regional Stormwater Project, as well as an update on the current status. So last this was discussed was September 14th, I should say 2020, not 2021. Where council approved their funding contribution towards this regional project. So going back to 2012, there was a group of regional partners that decided to start lobbying the government to get funding towards a stormwater management plan. They were successful in obtaining the funding towards a study, which was ultimately given to NPE Engineering. Within this study, NPE identified $151 million worth of stormwater projects in the southern Alberta region. These are largely, I guess, intended to mitigate damages caused by flooding. Within their implementation plan, they identified different projects, with phase one being the Horsefly Spillway project, which is near Tabor. The cost estimate at the time for this project was $47,115,000. The committee then submitted grant applications to the provincial and federal governments, where they successfully received a total of $39,146,349 of combined funding from the provincial and federal governments towards the Horsefly Spillway project. If you scroll down a bit, you can see the table here breaking down. Oh, maybe it's not on there. That's what we had issues with. I think you guys received a revised copy of this report. There is a table breaking down the funding contributions from ACRP, the ISIP program through the feds, as well as the DMAP program through the feds for each of the respective phases. as well as the municipal contribution requirement that is outstanding for each of the phases based on the original cost estimate. So looking at the municipal contribution required for each of the phases, the technical committee had gone back and forth trying to figure out a fair way of distributing the funds across the partners. Ultimately, there never was a final agreement reached. So these numbers here were largely determined based on what each municipality agreed to at the time, loosely based off the formula. But there never was an exact formula that was distributed to each party to come up with these numbers. So as you can see, Coldell contributed or committed to 8% of the phase one cost, which is $456,610. This leads into a total of $632,203 total for phase one municipal funds. As you know from the table above, there's still a shortfall of $1.292 million that has not been covered. However, the MD and other partners are still performing lobbying to other municipal partners that are in the region that would also benefit from this project. So there is still active engagement to try to cover that final cost. So leading into current status as of today, the project was tendered on September 15th, 2022. I should say phase one was tendered on September 15th and closed on October 13th. There were 6 bids received, with the lowest bidder submitting a contract price of $25,345,180, which is $4,915,930 higher than the original estimated cost. So essentially, on top of the $1.2 million shortfall, there's an additional $4.9 million shortfall from the agreed upon contributions from the municipalities. So the technical committee met as a group and decided that they would shift the ACRP funds from phases 2 and 3 to cover the shortfall for phase one. Phase one is the more critical piece of the project. So saying that if phase one was the only thing that happened, MPE still believes that there is still tangible benefits of the project being completed. So by doing so, it allows the project to proceed without having to spend extra money on engineering and redesigning the project, and gives additional time to lobby the governments for more money. I guess just one final note, we did meet, or MPE met with the low bidder to discuss cost saving opportunities, just to see from their perspective, is there anything with the design, the tender documents that could be adjusted to result in a more efficient product. We were able to trim back on some of the road crossing specifications, which did lower the cost by $458,000. So that lowered the contract price to $24,887,180. And one other thing to note, the MD of Tabor has agreed to commit $977,000 that they have received in ACRP funding for another project. So they had received the money on another project and they haven't used it. And they're essentially shifting it towards this project because the ACRP program allows municipalities to do so. So there was some discussions about cost saving items that came up where the MD was benefiting more by keeping them. So in favor of them keeping some of the nicer items and not saving costs for everyone, that was their bargain to the group, is that we'll put in this extra $977,000 in faith and ultimately get a better product. So that's essentially the update, just for information. For those that want to look at, I guess from a plan view, just where the project is, if you're totally unfamiliar, there is a slideshow that MPE gave attached to the report. You're welcome to reference it. So if you have any questions about the project, where it's located, anything like that. Definitely open to questions.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you. So with all the partners in here, how come St. Mary's or irrigation districts are not involved as people that are putting any funding into this? They will be the beneficiaries. They're the one that sell the water rights. They get the money from that. And I realize it's stormwater, but they're going to be retaining that and then moving it downstream. And then we also have a lot of municipalities downstream that are not involved. The city of Medicine Hat is one that's glaring that is not involved. We've got 7 persons because if this works in phases to the spillways, it flows downstream. And we know Medicine Hat has been susceptible to flooding and dam breaching and all of this stuff that needs to be fixed. So how come everybody upstream is putting the funding into it and the irrigation districts are not involved and the people downstream are not?
Thanks for the question, Councilor Avery. With respect to St. Mary's, they are handling the land acquisition required for the project, so they do have a financial stake. It just wasn't, I guess, through the same light as the municipal partners. I can't comment on why, but there is commitment by them. Medicine Hat, I guess that's more of a, I think, a political question. I think we could definitely say from a technical perspective that there is benefit downstream within the basin. So I think I would recommend more lobbying. I'm not sure how much has been done to date, given that I wasn't involved with the original part of the project, but I would echo your statement. Thank you.
Myself and Deputy Mayor Pickering and Councillor Reese, the CAO, and Dustin were at the last meeting, and so that question came up. So they are on the agenda to meet with the committee, to meet with Medicine Hat and the City of Lethbridge. So hopefully that's still going to have some opportunity to get some funding from them as well.
Yeah, they have met with the City of Lethbridge recently. Supposedly it went well, but nothing committed, no pen to paper, anything like that. The other thing, I guess, the Medicine Hat has been, their technical team has been in support. They've been part of the technical committee, coming to meetings. So I think they're on board with the project. So I don't know if it's a matter of, I guess, perspective politically, but internally it appears that there is support there. So.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. When I was at the meeting as well, they talked about Alberta Transportation participating in it with culverts underneath Highway 3 and then 36. So if Phase 1 is going to be the focused project, then would Alberta Transportation then be out of that Phase 2 process, or would they still be part of that?
The road crossing on Highway 36 would still be part of Phase 1, but that's paid for by the municipal partners.
Right.
The Highway 3 crossing would be part of Phases 2 and 3, and that's still being covered by Alberta Transportation.
Right.
That answers your question.
So Dustin, when you were saying that you met for some cost-saving measures, what did they end up deciding on the culvert? Was it going to be galvanized or concrete?
They stayed with the concrete box culverts. So that was, I guess, part of what I was implying with the MD of Tabor, knowing that they were getting more of the Cadillac option in terms of the road crossings, because there was the ability to switch to a cheaper steel culvert and save more money. It benefits the MD more because they have the long-term maintenance responsibility. So in terms of them pushing that cost onto the group, that was where they decided to come forward with their $977,000. So as a technical committee, we felt that was reasonable from their end. Yeah, it would have been nice to have both the savings and the ACRP funding, but I think it is fair overall.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Dustin? Seeing none, can I get someone to sponsor a motion that council receive the Southern Regional Stormwater Update Report for information? Councilor Chapman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Dustin. Moving on to agenda item 8.2, we have our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, back to give us an update on our grants.
Thank you very much, Mayor Van Rijn. So wanted to take an opportunity to speak to council about grants generally and specifically, given especially that we're moving into budget season shortly. And so grants are something that represent an important source of revenue for the town. And so I thought it appropriate to provide a bit of an overview on some of the grants that we've either successfully or unsuccessfully applied for, or are in the process of applying for, to give council a bit of a snapshot of how this landscape works. There's really two fundamentally types of grants in the municipal sphere. There's things like the province's provision of the Municipal Sustainability Initiative, or from the federal government, the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly the federal gas tax grant, which are grants that are provided on a per capita basis to all municipalities, sort of a automatic, for lack of a better term, funding model provided by the two more senior levels of government. And then beyond that, there are what you might call more ad hoc grant opportunities. Sometimes these grant opportunities are regular and exist year over year, and we see that with some of the, particularly, let's say, the grant that would have been achieved for the sewer expansion, I believe the Alberta Water Partnership. I do not recall the acronym for that particular one, but or Water for Life, for example, which has been around for the better part of 20 years. But in a number of grant situations, these are things that are can sometimes pop up in short notice and provide for an opportunity for application and then move on. And so we've had some success in that field over the last little while, so I wanted to discuss that with council, provide council an opportunity to ask some questions if you have any about the grant space. So one of the areas where we've been successful recently is with the municipal internship program. So that was initially how Melanie Messier was brought into our organization, and that was a 2019 application. And more recently, we were awarded a municipal intern, which is a grant provided from Alberta Municipal Affairs, and that has brought Tom Anderson into our organization as a municipal intern. So this is a grant that is designed to increase the capacity of smaller municipalities within the province in terms of building a professional workforce in the field. And so this is a grant that provides approximately 2/3 cost funding to bring someone like this, a recent university graduate, into an organization, provide them an opportunity to learn the field, as well as provide some real value back to the municipality. And so Tom is within the administrative stream, and the purpose of that stream is really to provide Tom with work across the various fields within the organization. So some exposure to planning and development, some exposure to infrastructure, exposure to finance, while at the same time, again, getting some real value back for him. So Tom has worked for us for approximately a 6-month period, and he's had an opportunity to work in things like some development enforcement, actually, and some issuing some development permits and working on that side of things, as well as he is preparing the strategic or the comparative analysis, which is upcoming. It'll be part of Planning and Development's Q4 presentation, which is presented to Council in December. And also right now we're looking at an opportunity. When Southgrow was here at the previous council meeting, they spoke briefly about a rural labor immigration initiative that they're working on, and that might be an opportunity for Tom to spearhead that program for the town of Coaldale, which would provide us for an opportunity to provide a portal for our businesses within the community to more easily access an international labor pool. And so that's something that we're currently exploring with him. Broken down, just a couple other grants. I won't go through all of them in detail, provide them here in the report, but on the community services side, we've had a number of successes with respect to grants, specifically with respect to some of our recreation facilities. So we were provided with $50,000 through the electric vehicle for municipalities grant back in 2021 for a $50,000 towards the purchase of an electric Zamboni. The McCain Foundation, so this is a grant that comes from private industry, but the McCain Foundation, as you know, provided a significant contribution towards the rec center through their granting initiative. We were also seeking support through another organization, the Co-op Community Spaces Fund, where we were applying for funding for the turf within the soccer center. We weren't successful on that, so that's an example of one where we didn't get the money. We don't win every time, but that's okay. We provided $75,000 towards changes to the recreation center for improving accessibility through the Enabling Accessibility Fund. And we have recently, well, not so much recently, it's been a few months now, applied through what's known as the large stream of the Community Facility Enhancement Program, which is a provincial program to provide funding to community groups for initiatives to support facilities that provide a public use. And so we've sought $300,000 of funding. That application is done in partnership with a community group that will be operating the daycare within the space, and that would be $300,000 towards the purchase of the indoor playground component of that project. That remains outstanding. We still haven't heard a word back on that one. And very recently applied along with the Coaldale Curling Association for funding through the Community Foundation of Lethbridge in Southern Alberta for improvements to the Coaldale Curling Club. So that's an initiative that was brought forward to us by the Curling Association. We simply lent our, for lack of a better word, expertise in putting the applications together to them and put it together in that regard. Again, that remains under consideration. We'd successfully achieved funding through that program previously for the fire camp project. With respect to other infrastructure, we recently were successful in funding 60% of the project costs for the pathways, which were recently completed on the east end of town near the dog park. And so that was a project for which the federal government provided $110,000 of funding through the Active Transportation Fund. That's an example of a program that came up relatively quickly and had a relatively quick turnaround time for applications. And so that was a project that the engineering was ready to go, the design was ready to go, it was a good fit for the program, so we used that particular project to apply. Having been successful in that, we are anticipating that project to open again, likely in January. And so that might be an opportunity to seek maybe a larger project through the same fund. So we're looking at exploring the opportunity for expansion of the birds of prey pathways, which is the subject of another grant application, but would be something where we could lump the two together and provide additional funding support. Given that we've already had some success in that program, and we understand how to put together a successful application, we're excited about that opportunity. We have successfully applied previously for $750,000 towards upgrades of our outdoor civic space. And that was approved, but we're currently under consideration for extending that to allow for construction next summer, which is something we're actively working with them on. We applied along with the Coaldale Handy Ride Association for funding towards the purchase of a larger and more modern bus for them. So that's something that I understand is still under review. Maybe just one or two more that will highlight. The Natural Infrastructure Fund is something we discussed previously with Council about an opportunity to apply for funding for the expansion of the ponds around the Birds of Prey Center. And so that would potentially be something we could do jointly with the Pathway Fund there, where we would receive multiple layers of funding largely towards the same project. And that's a $1 million potential grant for a project that's just slightly over $2 million. And then we are looking at the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program. So that's a competitive program to fund strategic transportation infrastructure. And we are looking at an opportunity to cover some of the costs associated with the expansion of 12th Avenue, which would be in the new industrial area, which is a program that we're looking at jointly with the developers of that region. And then we're also looking at the pedestrian crossing for Highway 3 associated with the crossing to the northern part of the community which would be under a separate stream of that program, and so realistically we can apply for both. There's a lot of that. It just keeps coming out. So yeah, we just thought it makes sense to put that in front of council, make sure that council's aware of some of the work that goes into these things and our approach to it. And then if there's council's questions or wants additional information.
Back to the birds of prey, item number 6 on that list. When do you expect to hear back on that one?
That is a federal program. And in my experience, federal programs tend to take longer than you expect them to take, is the political answer. I'm hopeful that we will hear in the spring.
In the spring. Okay, thank you. Any questions for Cameron? Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn, through to Cam. Is there a possibility for a grant for aerating the berm for trees? Is there any grants available for that?
Sorry, the berm adjacent to the school site?
Yeah.
To air it, like to provide for the planting of trees and shrubs? There's nothing. There's a private sector grant that's specific to tree planting, but I think it's fairly small. I think it's a $5,000 limit, which doesn't really go super far. But if that's a project that is something we want to pursue, we can certainly add it to our inventory. The way we tend to work with this is that a lot of the applications, and the federal government ones, for example, are the most, the applications are the most difficult typically at that level. It's several days of writing typically, and they're really often looking for projects that are already sort of semi-engineered, and you can provide specs and drawings and things like that for. The less of that you have, the more difficult the pitch tends to be. And I don't believe we have anything like that for that particular project. But some of these sort of more corporate grant opportunities, that might be a good fit for some of those. So if that's something we're interested in pursuing, I can keep an eye on for sure.
Thank you.
So if you can keep that on your radar, then if you see something like that come across. Okay, any other questions for Cameron? Seeing none, can I get someone to sponsor a motion that council receive the grants update as information? Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Cameron. Moving on to item 8.3, a comparative update regarding the crime severity index, and we have our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, presenting again. Cam, go ahead.
Thank you. Happy to be back. So council is aware that the town of Coaldale publishes a document on an annual basis called the comparative. We call it the comparative analysis, and it's quite simply something we do here to provide for another way of analyzing the organization and the community, and to provide some relative data so that our residents and our ratepayers and our businesses can have a better understanding of how the town's operation or the town's situation is going relative to peers, to provide some context for things like financial information and population growth and other things that don't exist on an island for the town of Coaldale. And so it's something that we've gotten tremendously positive feedback for, both in terms of our local residents having, appreciating the opportunity to have that information, as well as a tool for a marketing group. So one of the elements of my work is from an economic development perspective, talking to, say, prospective business owners, prospective investors in the community. It provides to them a sense of what Coaldale is and how things are going in Coaldale. And so it's a tool and it's a report we're fairly proud of here in town. So initially, when the report was conceived, we looked at 4 benchmarks at that time. And those benchmarks were operating expenditures and revenue, taxation, assessment growth, and population growth. And within those benchmarks, so operating expenditures, we break things down. For example, we look at spending on staffing on a per capita basis. So we say, how much does Coaldale spend per person within town compared to these other communities, Tabor and Black Falls these other communities. Because obviously we spend a lot on staffing, every municipality does, but how do we relative to that? And we added a fifth benchmark in the most recent comparative analysis where we looked at executive compensation. So how do we compensate our chief administrative officer, councillor, and mayor relative to other municipalities? That represents the fifth benchmark. And we're always interested in potentially adding more information. So given some of the conversations that we have about town, some of the things we see in social media, what we heard, and the interest we saw in the presentation the other day at the Gem of the West, hearing from the RCMP, we thought analyzing Coaldale's relative crime position relative to other communities might be an interesting thing for people to understand. And so Tom, our municipal intern, began researching how we might do something like that, where we'd have data-driven analysis of what is the crime situation in Coaldale and how do things stack up. And with our research, the crime severity index came up as a good metric. But parking that, we consulted with the RCMP and they asked their opinion. We said if we wanted to measure crime within our community compared to other communities, how would we do it? And their response was the same. It was to point us towards the crime severity index. They indicated that was the best tool for doing that. And so we started to learn a little bit more about the crime severity index, and it is a tool by which crime is measured in communities across Canada. It's something that's collected by Statistics Canada, which is nice because it's not collected by us. It's a sort of an impartial third-party collection of data that's based on crime reported to police, and it measures crime, not just the number of crimes reported, but also has a weighted metric, whereas to provide for a more significant weighting towards more what you might call more serious crimes. So, for example, it's not simply to say, well, there were 200 crimes reported. A murder would more substantially increase the crime severity index than would the theft of a bicycle, for example, by a significant measure. And so it provides for some ability to measure not just the frequency of crime, but also its severity. And so when we look at the crime severity index, we can find this information for all of the municipalities within the comparative analysis area, which is to say Taber and Lethbridge County, Black Falls, Edson, Drumheller, Ponoka, and did I say Taber? Taber. And what we found is that the crime severity index is 100 for Canada. So 100 is the number that is the Canadian average, and that the average for Alberta is slightly above the national average at 101.4. The 2021 CSI for Coaldale, which interestingly enough is at 44.5, and that's actually below our 5-year average. The average of 2021 going back 5 years is 52.5. And that 2021 value, when you compare to our peer group, looks like this. Edson is at 177, Lethbridge at 148.9, Drumheller at 127.5, Innisfail at 111.5, Ponoka at 75.4, Black Falls at 67.6, and Taber at 67.4. So putting that into perspective, fundamentally what we see is not only is Coaldale the lowest crime community within that peer group, but that it's also substantially lower than its peers. So we would need to see a 50% or more than a 50% increase in crime as weighted by this metric in order to become the second lowest crime municipality within the group. We would need to more than double the crime severity index rating of the town in order to become the average within the group. And so based on those empirical measurements, the crime rate in Coaldale is demonstrably low, quite low, in fact. And from administration's perspective, this is something that might prove to be an interesting thing to include in our comparative analysis. The reason for that, there are a few. Well, first of all, we like that the statistic is completely data-driven and is completely collected and maintained by a third party. So there's nothing about the crime severity index that's manipulated or manipulatable by the town. There's nothing I can do to affect that number through the collection of the data. And so if I present the data to a third party, they can't accuse me of saying, well, you're manipulating the data. I'm not. I'm just literally pulling it from Statistics Canada. I have nothing to do with it. So it's completely separate. Statistics Canada is an organization that I think has a certain reputation for being neutral. And so I like the fact that it comes from there. I like the fact that the RCMP also points me towards that data as being the data that I should be using. So that makes sense. And I also want to point out that the exercise, the reason we engaged in this exercise was not to go find data that paints Coaldale in a positive light. I had no idea what our crime severity index was going to look like when we engaged in this exercise. That is not the purpose. The purpose was to say, we know from our interactions with the community that there's a sense that in some people's instances, crime is very high, for example, might be a statement. And so we like to hear statements like that and say, is it? Right? I don't know. And so this is something where is an issue that might be emotionally driven, but for which there might be a fairly analytical way of analyzing it, and we don't necessarily see the emotional response and the analytical response having an opportunity to engage. And so this is something that fits well with the document from that regard. So what we're looking at here is to say, is this something that makes sense for that document that we would include in that document? And the way we would always look at this is to provide information. We would probably want to do a weighted average to account for the fact that you have fluctuations on a year-over-year basis. We want to provide visual tools and make sure that the data is quite easy to understand and provide things. The purpose of the document is to provide a document which is easy to understand and it requires no sort of technical ability or training in order to get value out of reading. And so that's the way we would design to include it, but wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to present that to council because this is ultimately all of our document, all of our report. So if this is something council wants us to include, we can include it before our presentation in December. If council feels it's best left aside and keep the report as it is, that's also perfectly fine.
Thank you. Excellent report, in depth. So all these stats obviously only come about if people report something that they see going on.
Yes, and that would be that's one of the things we would want to address because while it is true, you could argue that the CSI is not a perfect reflection of crime that occurs in the municipality because what about unreported crime? And that's fair. However, there is no reason to believe that unreported crime in Coaldale is significantly more of a problem than it is in Tabor or Lethbridge or anywhere else. And so it's reasonable to assume that the rate of crime reporting from one municipality to another, while not 100% of crime, is likely relatively similar from one municipality to another. And what's important here is not the number. What's important is the number relative to the other numbers. And for that reason, whether or not crime is reported sort of doesn't impact the statistic from my perspective.
Okay, all set. Any questions for Cameron? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and Cam, excellent report. The CSI index, is that collected from the RCMP and other data available to them?
Yeah, so my understanding of how it's collected is it's pulled directly from the various police, the various districts, and then run through basically a formula that they have that provides a weighting to each crime that's reported to come up with that value. The other thing I'll point out here too is that the information, we do separate the information. The information that was presented isn't the Coaldale RCMP data, it's the town of Coaldale data. We do separate what else, because this is obviously the Coaldale RCMP deal with a fairly large area. This is not the information for the large area, this is the information for our municipality.
Just to follow up on the first question, the numbers that reflect Coaldale seem to imply to me then that obviously that we're a safe community, which is a good marketing tool for economic development purposes, both for in industry and for people looking at Coaldale for a place to live, work, and play. But having said that, the concerns we hear on the street and from council ourselves is that a lot of the crime
quote unquote is, under 5,000, for example, cases of under 5,000. But those could be a lot of them that could still not account for a large, volume or a large case for cold ale. So is there something that we need to do, we need to continue to do yet to ensure that our message is clear, but also that our community is safe?
Thank you for the question. Very complicated answer, and probably not one I'm qualified to give completely. I look at this information as being similar to some of the other conversations. So I've been with the town a little over 4 years now, and the fact is, based on this data, and again, speaking from a relative perspective, relative to other communities, the fact is that cold ale meets the definition of a low crime jurisdiction based on these numbers. Doesn't mean it's free of crime, doesn't mean it's perfectly safe. But clearly, based on these numbers, it is a safe community. People's perception of what a crime rate is versus the reality of what a crime rate is do not necessarily always marry. We have tools for learning information like social media and things like that that can maybe present information that is incorrect or make certain things seem to be more prevalent than they are. And this was true when we first started the comparative analysis. It was very common for me to have discussions when I was first with the town of Coaldale where people's genuine thought was that taxes in Coaldale were twice that of Lethbridge. Factually, that's not the case, but that doesn't change the fact that people feel that way. And so to me, this is a tool to say that there may be a feeling in town that crime is high. Statistically, I would suggest that this metric tells us that it is not. That doesn't mean that we don't want to do anything to address crime as a municipality or as a council. It simply means that this is what the data tells us is true. So we want to adjust our response to it accordingly.
Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, can I get someone to sponsor the motion that Council direct administration to add analysis of the crime severity index as the 6th benchmark in the 2022 comparative analyst report? Councilor Chapman, any further discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 8.4, request for council support regarding a Alberta Water Waste Partnership grant application for potable water reservoir, and we have our CAO, Kalen Hastings, presenting on that.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So following on the heels of my colleague's grant presentation, we're going to talk about a specific grant here, and I think the acronym you were looking for was AMWWP. That's a bit of a tongue teaser. But the purpose of this report here is to request that Council provide a resolution of support for a grant application for the town's potable water reservoir and pump station project that we would like to make under the Alberta Water Wastewater Partnership Program. This is the same program that provided funds for the town's recent wastewater treatment upgrades. Funding for this program is determined each budget cycle, and eligible projects can receive up to 75% of the project cost, but this is based on population size. Unfortunately, the bigger you are, the smaller the percentage. So for Coaldale's size, 37.17% is the amount of eligible project costs that we could expect to receive if we're successful. The requirement of this particular grant is that Municipal Council make a resolution of support. And in the event that we're not successful, we are able to reapply, update the scope and budget numbers accordingly. Our thought process here, and our engineering consultants are in agreement, is that our view is it's better to get into the provincial queue because you never know when there's going to be a call for additional infrastructure dollars. We are going to start the design process in 2023, and we have the requisite studies to justify the scope of the project as well as the cost estimate that would be put forward. So our position is that 37.17% of a $10-12 million project paid for through a provincial grant would significantly assist our ability to construct this critical piece of core infrastructure. And it would be nice to know before breaking ground if funding of this nature is available so that we can plan accordingly. This program, the AMWWP program, is often oversubscribed, and therefore it's important to get in the queue and get in line because it starts the clock process off more than simply just leaving a project in your capital budget. We want to be in the actual provincial queue. The deadline for this project is November 30th, 2022. This is a project that will be coming forward in the town's capital budget in the next couple of weeks, but given the deadline for this grant, we didn't want to wait any longer than the meeting this evening. So following that, unless there's any questions from council, our recommendation is the council direct administration to submit a funding application under the Alberta Wastewater Partnership Program for the town's potable water reservoir and pump station project, and that council commit to its proportionate share of funding for this critical piece of infrastructure. And by proportionate share, that would be at the 62.83%. The alternative is if you don't commit to that, you're committing to the 100. It is something that we must do within the next 5 years, and we want to make sure that we get in the queue for the grant that best aligns for this type of infrastructure project sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Any questions for Kalen? Historically, when when a grant is given, and like we just received one for the wastewater treatment plant, does the town take that into consideration before giving a grant again under the same program to the same municipality?
Our understanding is that as long as it's a different project scope and it's for nothing related to the project that received previous funds, it's looked at separately. This is on the potable water distribution side of the water/wastewater program umbrella.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. I'll make the resolution that council direct administration to submit a funding application under the Alberta Wastewater Partnership Program for the town of Coaldale's potable water reservoir and pump station project, and that council commit to its proportionate share of funding for this critical piece of infrastructure.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor by Councillor Reese. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Then moving on to departmental reports, agenda item 9.1, a financial update for Q3 up to September 30th, 2022. And we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Kyle, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Okay, thank you and good evening, Council. So, yes, this is the Q3 financial update, similar to the others that have been presented to Council throughout the year. This is a financial update for the operating and the capital budget up to the period ending September 30th, 2022. So at this point, it does give us a fairly good baseline of where we're looking for the year end to come in here. So you'll note from the June 30th presentation, we kind of had best, worst, and middle case scenarios. 3 months later, we can drop that down and get fairly certain to where we anticipate coming up, unless there's any unexpected transactions the last couple months here. So I am first going to start on page 56 of your council agenda. So this is kind of the income statement for the town of Coaldale. So at the top, we have the revenues. The actual numbers are the ones in blue. So these are the actual revenues and expenses we've incurred in the year. In the middle is the budget number for the year. And on the far right side is the budget remaining. So we'll start at the revenues there. Property taxes expected once we net the property tax revenue with the property tax requisition expense. We do expect that to be on budget, so no surprises there. Recreation levy on budget. utility fees and services. So this one we're expecting to be a little higher. Again, this past year and the year before, longer, hotter summers has resulted in higher water consumption use, largely irrigation and whatnot. That has resulted in a slight surplus of 50 grand expected. Operating grants, the fire master plan was originally approved with a budget of $50,000 that was to be funded through our fire reserves. Subsequent to budget last year, we did receive a grant for the fire master plan of $42,000. So that's an extra surplus expected there. Land development, once that should be fairly on budget by the time we get to the end of the year. That will essentially conclude the lot sales for the current town industrial park. Franchise fees, small surplus expected. User fees, sales of goods. So this is, rentals of the arena, skating rink, pool, community center, curling rink, whatnot. User fees expected to be on budget. Investment income, a portion of our funds are locked in while a portion are tied to the floating interest rate. So as the prime rate goes up from the Bank of Canada, we also do have the opportunity to make additional funds from that revenue there. So we're expecting a surplus there of $150,000. Fines, penalties, this relates to folder radar, penalties on late payment of taxes, and other miscellaneous items. Surplus expected of $70,000. License permits, fees. This consists of development permits, permits for safety codes, whatnot. Our revenue from safety code inspections was a lot higher this year, so a surplus of $105,000 expected there. Finally, wrapping up revenues, that's related to the Colas Strong campaign, which isn't an operational item, so we don't budget that. Those funds will get moved to reserves at the end of the year for the recreation center and capital on that. On the expense side, you'll see that majority of these items are somewhere between 23 to 28% of the budget remaining. We have a quarter left here, so anywhere close to 25% means we're fairly on budget here. For the expenses, I'm just going to go through that on the next page. We have it broken down to maybe a little more. They're a different format here, so we break it out by function. So our wages, our contracted services, materials, transfer to the local board. So these are grants or payments we pay to, say, the library board or other organizations. Wages and salaries, budget for the year of 4.6. We're expecting a $300,000 surplus, again, for vacancies in the year and other miscellaneous adjustments. Contracted services, just picking out some of the key points here for council. RC&P, we do expect a deficit of approximately $74,000 for the year. Again, total estimated cost that Colo pays above for the 70-30 split is about $450,000 a year. Finally, the last item of variance for notes is our utility fees. We do expect to have a $75,000 deficit for the year as well. Scrolling down, we're just going to skip a page and go to page 59. This is just kind of a summary of the operating budget. So the items I went through, if an item is a negative, it means a deficit. If it doesn't have a negative, it's a surplus. So once we factor a couple items here, additional IT and equipment, furniture and equipment, largely at Civic Square, we're expecting an operating surplus of $155,000 for the year. That's our best estimate at the time. This could change, will likely change somewhat by the time we get to the end of the year, but we're fairly confident that number will be somewhat close to that. Last but not least, I'll go back up a page to the capital budget. So this is a list of the various capital projects we have. It's broken down into some of these projects in multi-year. So we've taken total cost incurred before, actual costs incurred up till September 30th and the total cost is the total cost incurred to date. And then on the right-hand side is the budget remaining, followed by some notes and where we expect these projects to come in at. So Pathways Phase 1, this project is almost complete. Some additional benches, furniture needs to be installed. We do anticipate a budget surplus of $180,000, with final cost coming in at $820,000 compared to a original budget of $1 million. Quality irrigation we've discussed before. The recreation center, no changes on that since the last update council has received. Civic Square, that project is near completion. Due to some change orders and project alterations, we're expecting to be $205,000 over the budget of $6.4 million. The wastewater lagoon upgrade, again, we got the grand opening or the ribbon cutting not too long ago, estimating a budget surplus of $150,000. There's still a few items that need to be figured out and completed on that item, but we're fairly confident in that number. Malloy Phase 2B, a little more to be determined next year on that one. Northwest Coaldale Civil Infrastructure, so this relates to the roads and utility lines, essentially on the northwest part of Coaldale. Final cost expected to be $2.93 million. A couple items of note: the single axle dump truck, budget of $180,000, anticipated to be at $145,000 with delivery completed for the end of the year. We did have a wide area mower, which we had budgeted $130,000, cost came in at $95,000, and a couple other smaller miscellaneous items that projects are completed were small budget surpluses. So basically, the punchline from this presentation, if you want to take a few things back, operating budget anticipating a final surplus of $155,000. The lagoons, a surplus of $150,000, and a deficit on the Civic Square of $205,000 that we have earmarked to fund through funds in our Northeast Industrial Land Reserve. Formal approval of that transfer will come back to council when the project is completed at the end of the year. That being said, I will turn this back to council for any questions on this report.
Thank you. Any questions for our CFO? I have a couple. Kyle, regarding the pathways, you said there's still some furniture to be installed. That tweaked the question I had when I was out on the pathway. Are we going to be putting, like, we'll use the one by the canal that runs east and west. Are we putting any benches along any of these pathways for people to have a rest?
I don't know the location specific, but there was about $10,000 in benches ordered for the pathways. So wherever they go, I don't know that, but there's around 10K in benches that we're going to be put out there.
Yeah, 10,000 wouldn't even cover 6 probably.
Yeah, I'd have to refer back to Jason Waits and Dustin, Yanke. Can follow up with them and send council a follow-up email on that.
I'm just kind of curious where they're going to be going.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get some information and follow up.
And then can you touch base a little bit on the RCMP retroactive?
They are still, I believe they're still looking at the best way to treat that. They're still lobbying, largely led by FCM, so the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, discussing with the federal government of how to pay this amount, when it should be paid. So we are just kind of waiting in the winds. We've estimated before that our retro pay would be $260,000-ish. We accrued that amount as an expense last year, so it's just basically sitting waiting to be paid. So if these organizations that are lobbying the feds are successful in maybe working out some cost sharing or some delay of the payment, anything would be good news from this point, from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question I got again is regarding the photo radar. So on the revenue line here, you had budgeted $541,626, and we're looking at $629,000 revenue in that.
We just flip those around. So the fines and penalties is budgeted at 629.
Yes.
So Fuller Radar, we include Fuller Radar and traffic fines from like the RCMP together. That yearly budget is 500,000. 110,000 is budget from tax penalties, and then miscellaneous small amounts to get you to that 629. Speaking on the Fuller Radar specifically, when we went back we did this presentation to council for June. For the radar specifically, we were looking at coming in at 450,000 for the year, and now we're expected to be probably about 520,000 for the year. So
it's net or gross?
That is our net revenue. So you can see in the 3 months since we presented last to council, it went up. Our expectations by about 70 grand, and we saw the amount that has come in the last 3 months from the summer travel was much higher than we had anticipated. So that's just from a higher number of tickets issued.
And just to refresh my memory, on the growth side of that, what's the percentage that the province takes?
60%.
There is, it's 60. The province takes, it's kind of, if the Fuller Radar, the province takes 40%, we get 60%. And then the province also charges another fee on top of that they get 100% of. So when you factor that in, it's close to 50-50-ish, I believe.
Thank you. I'll open it up again to council. Any questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much, Kyle. Can I get someone to sponsor a motion that council approve the financial update for September up to September 30th, 2022? Deputy Mayor Pickering. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to information items. We have 12.1 Barons Eureka Warner FCSS Board Meeting Minutes. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, can I get someone to sponsor a motion that council receive the BEW FCSS Board Meeting Minutes from June 1st, 2022 as information? Councilor Chapman, any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 12.2, the Barons Eureka Warner Board Meeting Minutes from September the 7th, 2022. Any discussion on that item?
I'll do that one as well.
Okay, Councilor Chapman makes a motion to receive the Barons Eureka Warner FCSS Board Meeting Minutes from September 7th, 2022 as information. Any discussion? Seeing none, call a question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 12.3, the Council 2022-2023 calendar approved as amended at our October 24th organizational meeting. Any discussion on that item? Can I get someone to make a motion that council receive the Council 2022-2023 calendar as information? Councilor Reese, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving down to item 12.4, the council committee appointments approved as amended at our October 24th organizational meeting. Any discussion on that one? Seeing none, can I get someone to make a motion that council receive the council committee appointment listing as information? Councilor Beekman, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And then 12.5, the citizen committee appointments approved at our October 24th organizational meeting. Any questions, comments on that one? You want to sponsor that one?
I got a question.
Question, go ahead.
Due to, on that appointment of them, of South Grove, it sounds like we're only allowed one committee member there and no alternate. That came in as an email to me.
Okay, so currently you're our council rep, and then we have one citizen member.
Apparently not. An email came to me from Peter saying, I believe, that we're not allowed to have one.
A citizen or a council
A
rep?
citizen.
Well, historically, we've always had one. Go ahead, Lana.
Yes, historically, for the past 5 years, we've had one citizen representative and one council representative. Peter had noted today he wanted to know which of the two was the alternate.
Okay.
I did explain that we have had these appointments since I've been here, so I'm investigating further, but I did speak with Cam about it today to check on it as well. So.
Okay, Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. From my recollection is that they have their expanded board, which meets quarterly. So the alternate or the citizen member would attend those meetings, but their executive appointments to their executive board is you as the town's representative only. So that's the way I understand it.
So Peter, the executive director, he's going to be getting back to you on that then, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we can pass the citizen appointments, and then you can come back with an update if that needs to be changed. Okay, thank you. So then I need someone to sponsor the council received the citizen committee appointment listing as information.
I'll sponsor it.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Pickering, thank you. All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. And then the last one, 12.6, a copy of correspondence to Minister of Justice and Solicitor General Honorable Tyler Shandro regarding the victim services redesign. And we have two options on this one, that we can receive it as information, or if we want to piggyback on Fox Creek, that was the original author of the letter, if we want to do the same to support their cause. So their two options are that council receive the victim services redesign correspondence as information, or that council direct administration to submit a similar letter of concern to the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General regarding the redesign of victim services program. So speaking in favor of the second option, where we send a letter of support, we are going to be having another update from Victim Services, the Coaldale corridor. So when I spoke to her at when we had that Halloween dog costume event a few weeks ago, she said whatever we could do to support their cause. So I think it would be suitable for us to draft a letter in support. So that's my take on it, but the other option is to receive it as correspondence. So I'll open it up to council for direction.
Just maybe my thoughts. This is a similar letter we've received before.
Yes.
And it has been addressed to some degree, but if you'd like to make that reference to the town of Coaldale and the victim services here, that we are in consultation with victim services in the direction of
Well, they just asked for our support wherever we could, so here's an opportunity again. So. But I'll leave it up to council. Councillor Beekman.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to pen a letter of support similar to this one.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And that concludes the open portion of the meeting. So at 6:24, I'll be needing a motion that council move into closed session in accordance with Section 197-4-B of the Municipal Government Act to discuss matters exempt from disclosure for item 13.1, subject to FOIP Section 21, intergovernment relations, and item 13.2, subject to FOIP Section 16, business interests of a third party, and Section 17, personal privacy. Can I get someone to sponsor that motion, please? Councillor Saylor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We'll take a 10-minute break.